Most people live their entire lives without ever meeting themselves. I don't mean that poetically, I mean it literally. There is a version of you operating right now in real time inside the same body you wake up in every morning that you have never directly looked at. Not because it hides, but because it has learned over years to look exactly like you. It has your voice, it has your reasoning, it has your spiritual language, your ambitions, your love for the people around you. It shows up to prayer, it sets goals, it feels guilt when it should feel guilt. From every external angle and even from most internal angles, it is indistinguishable from you. But it is not you. I want to tell you about something that happens to people, not weak people, not unserious people, but people who are genuinely trying. At some point in their lives, they reach something they worked for, something they prayed for, something real. And in the moment they arrive, instead of peace, they feel a kind of quiet alarm, like a small voice somewhere deep asking, "Is this it?" And they push that voice down because it seems ungrateful, because they got what they wanted, because everything looks right from the outside. And they keep going, building, achieving, maintaining, and the alarm keeps sounding, quieter each year, until one day it stops entirely. Not because they found peace, because they stopped being able to hear it. That alarm was the most important signal inside them, and the reason they lost it is the same reason you are watching this right now. Because somewhere in you, something knows that what is running your life is not fully you. Something knows there is a layer underneath the layer you live in. Something in you has been trying to surface for a long time. Tonight we look at what is actually there. There is something you do when no one is watching and you don't fully understand why you do it. Not the obvious things, not the habits you already know are wrong. Something quieter than that. Something that happens in the small, unguarded moments of your day. The moment you wake up and feel before a single thought forms a kind of heaviness you cannot name. The moment you are in the middle of something you chose, something you wanted, and without any warning you feel like leaving. Not because it is hard, but because something inside you just withdrew, like a door closing from the inside. You have noticed this, you have felt it, but you filed it under tiredness or stress, or maybe you blamed it on the day being off. That was not the right explanation. What you have been feeling is not a mood, it is not burnout, it is not even a spiritual crisis, at least not in the way people typically describe one. What you have been feeling is the evidence of something that has been happening inside you for a long time. Something that most people never see clearly enough to name, and so they live with it for years, sometimes forever, feeling the effect without ever finding the cause. There are two versions of you, not metaphorically, not in the motivational sense of your old self and your new self. I mean something more precise than that and more unsettling. There are two operating systems running inside the same body, the same face, the same name. One of them you know. One of them you think is you, and the other one, the one you barely acknowledge, the one you have spent most of your life either feeding or running from without realizing it, that one has been making decisions you thought were yours. That is what we need to look at tonight, not quickly, not with easy answers, because if I explain this too fast, your mind will nod and move on. And this is not information meant to be nodded at. This is something meant to be sat with. So we go slowly and we look at what is actually there. Start with something you already know but have never quite confronted directly. You do not always want what you think you want. Think about a time you wanted something badly, genuinely badly. You could feel the wanting of it in your chest like a physical pressure. You worked for it or waited for it or prayed for it, and then it came. And for a brief moment, sometimes a day, sometimes an hour, sometimes only a few seconds, you felt it. That sense of arrival, that exhale, and then quietly, without permission, without reason, the wanting came back. A new wanting, or a hollow version of the old one. And the thing you had worked so hard to reach began to feel ordinary, began to feel like just another item in your life, already starting to fade. You called this human nature. You called it the grass is always greener. You moved on, but you did not understand what actually happened in that moment. What happened was not ingratitude, and it was not a character flaw. What happened was a very precise mechanical process inside you, a process that has a name, a structure, and a purpose. And until you understand that process, you will spend the rest of your life chasing versions of arrival that dissolve the moment you reach them, wondering why the thing you wanted is never quite the thing you needed. The Nafs. This word is translated usually as soul or self, but that translation loses almost everything important. The Nafs is not your soul in the poetic sense. The Nafs is the part of you that is alive in the most animal way. It is the part that feels hunger before the mind processes hunger. The part that reaches toward pleasure before the will decides to reach. The part that recoils from pain before any rational assessment of whether that pain is necessary or good. The Nafs is not bad. It is not your enemy, but it is not your friend either. It is a force. Specifically, it is the force in you that is entirely committed to one thing, its own satisfaction. And it will use anything to get there, including your reasoning, including your spirituality, including your ambitions, including your relationships. The Nafs does not argue with you. It does not announce itself. It simply generates a feeling, and then your mind produces the justification for that feeling so quickly, so automatically, that you experience the justification as the reason and the feeling as the conclusion, when in reality the feeling came first. The reason was built around it to make it look legitimate. This is not a small thing. This is the mechanism behind almost every decision you have ever regretted. You have done this. You have felt an impulse to avoid something, to indulge something, to escape something, and within seconds your mind handed you a very logical, very reasonable sounding explanation for why that impulse was actually the right choice, why you needed rest today specifically, why this situation was the exception, why you were different from other people in this regard, why just this once was fine. The Nafs does not speak, it narrates through you. And here is where the second version of you begins to take shape. Because the Nafs, if it is left to operate without resistance, not opposed dramatically, not fought with rigid discipline, but simply never examined, never held up to the light and asked, wait, where did this feeling come from? It begins to build a self around itself, a version of you that is its instrument. A version that looks like you, sounds like you, has your memories and your voice and your face, but whose decisions are consistently, quietly in the direction of comfort, avoidance, and self-preservation, dressed as ambition or virtue or practicality. That second version of you is not evil. That is the part people misunderstand. The Nafs at this stage is not producing monsters. It is producing something far more ordinary and far more dangerous. A version of you that is functional enough to avoid confrontation with itself, spiritual enough to feel clean, busy enough to feel productive, and yet somehow never quite arriving, never quite at peace, never quite free. You recognize this. You have met this version of yourself, not in a dramatic moment of crisis, in the quiet moments. When you make a promise to yourself and break it, not because you forgot, but because in the moment of keeping it, something in you just did not want to. When you are with people you love and you feel underneath the warmth, a faint distance as if you are slightly behind glass. When you scroll through your phone, not because you want anything on it, but because something in you needs the sensation of moving. When you pray or try to pray and you notice that a part of you is somewhere else entirely and you cannot quite locate where it went. These are not random experiences. These are symptoms of a divided inner life. The Qalb, the heart in the Islamic sense, is not an emotion. Most people misunderstand it as the seat of feeling, the place where love and grief live. And yes, those things are there, but the Qalb is something more precise. It is the part of you that faces a direction. The Qalb, when it is functioning, when it is healthy, is oriented. It has a direction it is turned toward, and from that orientation, everything else, your attention, your choices, your energy, your experience of meaning flows. The problem is that the Qalb can be turned, not all at once, not in a single dramatic moment of corruption or failure. It turns the way a compass is slowly pulled off course by a magnet placed near it, incrementally, imperceptibly, until one day you look up and realize you are facing something you never intended to face, and everything you built has been built slightly off in a direction you did not choose. What pulls the Qalb off course is not sin in the simple sense of the word, it is attachment. Specifically the kind of attachment that the Nafs engineers quietly. The kind where something in your life, a person, a goal, a version of yourself, an image of how things should be, begins to take up the space in your heart that was never meant to be filled by anything finite. And the terrifying thing about this process is that it does not feel like corruption. It feels like love. It feels like purpose. It feels like finally having something that matters. Until the day that thing is threatened or taken or simply reveals that it cannot hold the weight you have placed on it. And then you feel something that is very difficult to describe to someone who has never felt it. You feel a kind of inner collapse that is entirely disproportionate to the external event. Something happened, maybe something small, and you fell inward in a way that seems excessive, seems like an overreaction, seems like more than the situation called for. And people around you may not understand why you are reacting this way. You may not understand it yourself. But the reason is not weakness. The reason is that what was threatened was not just the external thing. What was threatened was the structure your Qalb had built around that thing. The entire architecture of meaning and identity and direction that had been quietly built on a foundation that was never solid enough to bear it. This is the destruction the title points to. Not a dramatic collapse, not a visible breakdown. The destruction of the second version of you is gradual, systemic, and largely invisible. It is the slow erosion of aliveness, the increasing effort it takes to feel present in your own life, the growing distance between who you perform yourself to be and who you actually are in the silence. The moments of doing things you used to love and feeling nothing. The moments of achieving things you worked for and feeling almost immediately the return of a familiar emptiness. That emptiness is not meaninglessness. I want you to hear this clearly. That emptiness is a signal. It is the most honest thing inside you speaking. It is the Ruh, the spirit, the breath of divine origin within you, refusing to be satisfied by what was never meant to satisfy it. The Ruh does not argue, it does not complain loudly, it does not stage protests inside you. It simply remains quietly, persistently dissatisfied with anything less than what it was made for. And because we rarely slow down enough to hear it, because the Nafs is so loud, so immediate, so good at generating sensation and the illusion of meaning, we usually experience the Ruh's dissatisfaction only as a vague background unease. A low hum of something is missing that we cannot locate and so cannot address. The Ruh is not destroyed by the second version of you, but it is buried, and a buried Ruh produces a very specific kind of person. Someone who is technically alive but not quite present, technically functioning but not quite free, technically spiritual but not quite transformed. Someone who knows the right things to say, has read the right things, understands the concepts at the level of the mind, but whose inner life has not yet actually changed in the places that matter most. You may be that person, and if you recognized yourself in that description, that recognition is not an accusation. It is the beginning of something, because here is the second layer, the thing beneath what you thought was happening. You thought the problem was discipline. You thought if you could just be more consistent, more structured, more committed, if you could fix the output, fix the routine, fix the habits, everything would shift. And you have tried versions of this many times, and it worked briefly, and then it did not. And you called yourself weak or undisciplined or not serious enough, and you reset and tried again. But discipline is not the door. Discipline is what comes after the door. The door is understanding which version of you is actually at the controls. Because if the second version, the Nafs built comfort-oriented image-protecting version, is at the center of your life, then every attempt at discipline is fundamentally unstable. Not because you are weak, but because you are trying to change the outputs of a system whose core direction has not changed. You are rearranging things on the surface of something that is still pointed the wrong way underneath. And the exhaustion you feel, the particular kind of exhaustion that comes not from doing too much, but from doing things without the sense that they are actually moving you somewhere real. That exhaustion is not a productivity problem, it is a direction problem. The Nafs, at its lowest expression, does not want discipline. It does not want resistance. It wants to remain comfortable and to call that comfort by better names. It will let you be disciplined about things that do not threaten it. It will let you build routines and read books and attend events and post content as long as the core of you, the actual orientation of your heart, remains undisturbed. The Nafs is not threatened by surface change, it is threatened by real change, and it knows the difference even when you do not. So it will give you the feeling of progress, it will give you the mood of growth, it will give you the narrative of transformation. And underneath all of that, the Qalb remains pointed in the direction the Nafs chose for it years ago, quietly, without your awareness. This is not hopelessness. This is diagnosis. Because you cannot fix what you have not accurately named. And most people spend their entire lives treating the symptoms, the broken promises to themselves, the hollow achievements, the restlessness that never resolves, the relationships that always carry a faint undercurrent of dissatisfaction, without ever understanding the system that is producing those symptoms. The first version of you, the one that was there before the Nafs fully consolidated its architecture, is not gone. This is the part I want you to sit with for a moment, because it matters more than anything else I have said. The Ruh is still there. It has always been there. It was placed in you not by your choices, not by your family, not by your culture, but at a level so fundamental that nothing you have done or left undone has been able to remove it. It is quieter than the Nafs. It does not compete the way the Nafs competes. It does not generate sensation or urgency or narrative. It simply remains, present, waiting, not impatiently. The Ruh does not experience impatience the way the Nafs does, but with the kind of permanent, steady availability that is there every time you go genuinely quiet enough to feel it. You have felt it. In moments you probably did not label as spiritual. In a moment of real stillness, not planned stillness, not forced meditation, but an unguarded moment where the noise inside you briefly paused, and in that pause there was something, not emptiness. Something with a quality that is very hard to describe to someone who has not felt it, but which is immediately recognizable when you encounter it. A kind of okayness that does not depend on circumstances, a kind of presence that is not performing anything. A lightness that is not about what happened that day. That was not imagination. That was the Ruh surfacing briefly through the layers above it. And the path, the actual path, not the disciplined surface of the path, but the thing underneath the discipline, is the gradual process of removing what has been placed over it. Not in a dramatic purging, not in a single moment of transformation, but in the slow, daily, sometimes tedious, sometimes quietly beautiful practice of turning the Qalb back toward what it was made to face, which means concretely learning to recognize when the Nafs is narrating, learning to feel the difference between a desire that comes from the Ruh, which always has a quality of expansion, of opening, of something real being pointed to, and a desire that comes from the Nafs, which always, if you look carefully, has underneath it a kind of contraction, a kind of grasping, a kind of anxiety it is trying to resolve through acquisition. It means sitting with the moments of resistance, the moments where you know what you should do, and something in you refuses, not in order to force yourself through them with willpower, but in order to look at them directly and ask what exactly is being threatened here. What is the Nafs protecting? What is the thing it does not want exposed? It means being honest about what your heart is actually attached to, not what you say it is attached to, not what your spiritual vocabulary suggests it should be attached to, but what it actually functionally, practically runs toward, when it is afraid, when it is bored, when it is in pain, because the second version of you was not built in a day, and it will not dissolve in a day. But it begins to dissolve the moment you stop confusing it with yourself. The moment you look at it directly and say, that is not me, that is what was built over me, and underneath it something is still there. The first version of you, the version with the ruh intact, the Qalb oriented, the Nafs in its proper place, not eliminated, not suppressed, but no longer in charge. That version is not a future self you have to construct. It is a present self you have to uncover. And the strange thing, the thing that tends to quietly rearrange everything once you actually understand it, is that the uncovering does not require becoming more. It requires becoming less. Less defended, less performing, less attached to the narrative the second version of you has been running about who you are and why and what it all means. It requires more than anything else a kind of honesty that is not comfortable but that is clean. The honesty that comes when you stop explaining yourself to yourself and simply look at what is there. The honesty that the Nafs will resist because its entire architecture is built on a version of yourself that looks good from the inside. And the moment you look at it clearly, without the narration, without the justification, without the spiritual language that sometimes covers spiritual absence, it begins to shift. Not dramatically, not all at once, but something clicks. And once it clicks, you cannot quite unclick it. That click, that moment of seeing yourself from the outside of your own story, of recognizing the second version operating in real time, of feeling the ruh beneath the noise that is not the end of anything, that is the beginning of the only version of yourself worth becoming.